Hello folks, I'm Francois Burman from Divers Alert Network. I manage the Safety Services Department, and our vision really is to make sure that people go diving safely. And part of the things that go wrong are related to the equipment, and I have with us today the super specialist in safety and equipment management, Mark Gresham, from his company PSI-PCI. He's very kindly agreed to sit here today and speak a little bit about some of the issues we get out there, what goes wrong, how people get harmed, and what you as a scuba diver should know about to prevent it happening to you. Okay, so Mark, you're very well known in the industry as somebody that focuses on cylinder safety. And we hear all about cylinder incidents, but in reality, the numbers are not that huge, are they?
Correct. It's a rare occurrence when it occurs. Yeah, it's not a common thing.
But when it does, it can be pretty devastating, and we'll see significant loss to buildings. We can have fatalities in some cases. Sadly, that'll happen even at home when people are not taking care of the equipment correctly. Just maybe some perspective that you can understand why we are concerned about this, and Mark taught me this many years ago, is the average scuba cylinder, so your typical 80 cubic foot cylinder, contains about as much energy as a small motor vehicle traveling down the freeway at 140 kilometers an hour. And for you folks, at 70 miles an hour, at 70 miles an hour. And if it comes to a dead stop, the amount of energy in that motor vehicle at the time, the momentum as we would call it, is the same energy release that you'd get if a cylinder were to explode. Regular scuba cylinder, the one that you throw around with absolutely no compunction when you go diving. And we all know when we learn to scuba dive, and our instructor does a good job with us, we are pretty careful as to how we handle things. That's the first time, and the second and the third time, but in no time at all, probably by the end of your open water course, you are handling these things as if there was nothing to worry about. And remember, that energy hasn't gone away, the risk hasn't lessened in any way. It's exactly as dangerous as it was when we started, but we just become kind of complacent. So what we thought we'd do is discuss a little, really I want to ask Marky's opinion. Are we overplaying this? How significant are the accidents? Typically, what causes a cylinder to explode? I mean, they're designed to be manhandled. They're not designed to, be something that you, like a time bomb, you're never quite sure when it's going to explode. And then how serious is the issue? In our scuba industry, we know people use gas cylinders in factories and these days at home with breathing problems. So we're a very small subset of cylinder users. But for scuba divers, how significant is this? So really, I think my first question to you, Mark, and I know you teach this in your courses, is what causes cylinders to explode?
Most cylinder failures are a direct result of poor maintenance, poor handling. Most of them are caused by humans that are not educated or have chosen to, should I say, thwart the rules for their own expeditiousness or something that makes it easier for them. I don't like to use the word lazy, but that word certainly exists as a result of people just trying to take shortcuts.
It's interesting you say that. You recently presented a course, and one of my members of staff were on the course. And when he got back to the office, he said to me, I have a 2,400 PSI cylinder, and I was told you can fill it to 3,300 PSI, no problem at all. I mean, that's a significant overpressurization of it. And of course, you do that to extend your time underwater. So I think the point is that divers really need to know what to read on the cylinder, what it really means to them, right?
Service pressure is so misunderstood. There's a lot of people that have interpreted this wildly. What we see is a rated service pressure on a cylinder is based on ideal gas law, 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 21.78 C. So our ratings are based on basic gas rules. People assume that, it's a steel cylinder, so it's tougher. I can overfill it to get 5 extra breaths underwater. One of the jokes that I like to say is if you have customers that always want to overfill cylinders, then you're not very good at sales. You should sell them a larger cylinder. Overfilling cylinders is just wholly dangerous. Cylinders are designed for 100,000 fills, 10,000 hydrocycles, if we fill them as designed. So when you're overfilling cylinders with regularity, you're removing the ductility from the metal. And the fact is they become work hardened and brittle. So it is a common practice in many parts of our country where we overfill cylinders so we can stay underwater for an extra 2 or 5 minutes. It's kind of crazy, really.
I guess part of the problem is we know people overfill them. I mean, they even stamped 4,500 PSI, which is the test pressure on the cylinder. And it is actually a safe enough pressure. The problem is it's time, as you said, numbers of cycles, and then add to that equation with an aluminum cylinder, leaving at the back of your motor vehicle when it gets up to 120, 130 degrees. And these numbers and figures and this data really comes from a lot of research that people like the Compressed Gas Association have done. So we know the numbers are real. They're not some idealistic thing that people throw around. But so if I had an aluminum, I apologize, Mark, 80 in the back of my car, what role does the temperature play in making that cylinder weaker? Aluminum,
or correctly pronounced aluminium, well, us Yanks have messed that word up. The fact is that a 200 degree Fahrenheit trunk or boot, depending on where you are in the world, you can have degradation up to 10% of the aluminum. And you imagine storing your cylinders in this heat wave that we've had recently in the trunk of your car, and you just ignore them day after day after day. The certain cylinder's structural integrity is degraded, and it is permanent. It is not something that is reversible.
Now, to some extent, the design takes care of this, right? I mean,
yes.
They tend to over-design them, but that doesn't give us license to abuse them. And I think a combination of being lazy, forgetting them in your trunk, having them overfilled because we want to squeeze a bit of extra air into the cylinder, that really causes it to weaken, and eventually you become the statistic, and that day is not a good day for you. So, in your experience, and I know you get called in to investigate and give your expert opinion on many of the accidents, you've shared them with me over the years. Typically, when a cylinder explodes, what happens? What does it look like? Does it fragment into tiny pieces, or what do you normally see?
Recently, we had an aluminum cylinder in the oxygen cylinder business that ruptured, and it ruptured into 16 pieces. We know that failure was a direct result of compression, heating, and a fire and explosion. The cylinder alloy was weakened so quickly that it fragmented in pieces. Most aluminum cylinders will not fragment in pieces when they rupture. An overfilling issue typically doesn't cause a cylinder to rupture in many pieces. It'll just open or split the sidewall of the cylinder as designed. All DOT cylinders are designed not to fragment, or a lot of people use the incorrect terminology, shrapnel or fragments. But the fact is that they're designed not to do that. How do we get them to break in a bunch of pieces? Well, we do things like, for example, they've been heat damaged, or they've had rough usage, or they have mechanical corrosion or mechanical damage on the cylinder sidewalls, the weakest part of the cylinder. And when you overfill them or fill them very rapidly or fill them so rapidly, like with nitrox, you can cause a compression heating fire. Then they will fragment into many pieces.
Yeah. I'm an engineer, so from the design side of it, they're designed to non-fragment, they're designed to burst. But as we've seen, sometimes they're big pieces that come off, and sometimes it goes into much smaller pieces. Would you say that there's some degree of culpability from the manufacturer's quality control, that they're not managing the process, or do you think that they're pretty consistent with how they make cylinders? Is there something that the diver needs to be worried about buying cylinders of different brands and so on?
I would say across the board, the cylinder manufacturers are building the best cylinders we've ever had, especially with aluminium. I've seen the quality in my lifespan increase. Safety margins are increased. Cylinders are very good today compared to what they used to be. What I see is a lot of people that take that for granted, thinking then it's a higher quality cylinder so I can abuse it more, when in fact we probably shouldn't do that. It's a pressure vessel, has a lot of energy as you described. It's one of those things where we want to keep the energy on the inside of the cylinder, not on the outside of the cylinder. And how we handle them. I've seen people get off a dive boat, and I've seen them throw cylinders like cordwood, and they're stacking cylinders up in a pile where they're just throwing them. It's a foolhardy practice.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not likely to explode unless you do it from an elevated height. What's more likely to happen is it'll fall on its side, damage the valve, and then you're going to get a valve related pressure escape and cause a lot of damage from that too. So if you were to summarize really for the diver out there, what should the scuba diver be bearing in mind about taking care of his, or we'll just divide this into two, taking care of his cylinder that belongs to him or her, or the cylinder that they are renting from a equipment rental company?
Well, we all know that rental equipment is not treated very well. I could give you case in point studies of cars that I have rented in the past. A long story short, cylinders, if you own cylinders, the primary thing you can do is one, no rough usage. Number two, wash your cylinders with fresh water. We see people that go diving, use their cylinders correctly, not overfill their cylinders, but they never wash the cylinders. And the salt water is there in a humid environment like we have here in North Carolina. The salt air, or the salt on the cylinder, the moisture in the air, causes them to continue to corrode. Washing cylinders is after the diving day is actually paramount to their longevity.
Especially if they have a boot on the bottom.
Exactly.
Right? Steel cylinders.
Yeah, we did an experiment at PSI some years ago, or our founder Bill High did, and we found that even well-draining boots will hold moisture up to 30 days.
Yeah. That fortunately is the damage you can see. The bigger issue, of course,
Correct.
is the damage you can't see on the inside. So if I were renting a cylinder, okay, and I'm now in charge of the cylinder for my dive, what should I look at on the cylinder apart from the obvious? I mean, if it's got a ding in it or a scrape or a scratch, what's leaking, clearly I know not to use it. But we've got these numbers on the crown of the cylinder, and they're there for a reason. And for me, perhaps as the uninformed, what part of that should I really, the minimum part of it should I be aware of?
Well, the crown markings of a cylinder are established by the United States Department of Transportation or a Conformity European, wherever the cylinder is made. And those numbers will tell you when, number one, when it was produced, and that's the day at which we start our clock for our hydro periods or hydro requalification and our visual inspection. Usually a visual inspection is a label on the cylinder. Although labels are not required, it's an industry practice and pretty much followed. So on the crown of the cylinder here in the United States, hydro periods are every 5 years. Can we hydro it more often? Sure. If we think there's an issue like exposure to heat or something like that, we would certainly want to discover that, and hydro is the best way to do that. Then visual inspection is usually a sticker or label on the side of the cylinder that says the date in which it was performed, and according to CGA publication P5, we shouldn't exceed a year on our visual inspections because of rough usage and corrosive environments. Well, salt water is obviously a corrosive
There's
environment.
one proviso to that, though, which you explained very eloquently to someone the other day. So I have a cylinder, it's 4 years old. So it was visual 3 years before. I've never emptied it. Is it fit for me to take out and use it?
Yes, the US DOT allows for a cylinder, even out of hydrostatic test, even out of visual inspection, to be used for its intended service or purpose. Then when the gas pressure is lowered or used, then it needs to go to requalification because it cannot be filled until the requalification is completed.
So it's a good idea. I mean, rental cylinders are used all the time, so you're not expecting them not to have been used. So it needs to have a visual inspection. It needs to be in hydro. Now, one would expect the rental company to make sure they're in hydro, but that stamp, it gives you a date that's different to the date it was manufactured, tells you the degree of care. And then to me, the kind of the part I was hoping you'd say to me is, when you open your cylinder valve, with the quarter turned back, right? When I open my cylinder valve and I look at the pressure on the pressure gauge and it says 3,500 PSI, I think, great, lots of air. I look at the cylinder and it's a 3,000 PSI cylinder. That's one of the dead giveaways. And let's make it more real. This colleague of ours, 3,300 PSI on the gauge, a 2,400 PSI cylinder. So, I think a little bit of education is necessary, and it's not difficult. Visual, hydro, and pressure, and then obviously that it looks good. Anyway, folks, I think it'll give you some insights as to the specialist, the man that's got so much experience and has shared it with us all in the industry. It is an issue. We don't have many accidents, but as I always say, they come along with statistics, and it's 0.0001 person that loses their life when a cylinder explodes, but it's one person. It's not 0.0001 of a person. So it is necessary for us to follow the rules, follow the guidance, the training we're given when we first learn to dive, and then some basic steps, as Mark has explained to us here, things that you can do as the diver, be aware of. If it's your cylinder, make sure that it gets requalified correctly. If it's a rental, it's your life. That cylinder has loads of energy in it. Do at least the basic checks, like to make sure it's in date, and that when you open your cylinder valve and the pressure gauge hops up to whatever the fill pressure is, that it's below or not more than the rated pressure of the cylinder. So thank you for sharing that with us, and we'll see whether, as a result of this being posted, anybody has any questions. But Mark's very generous with his time, and he and I will get together and hopefully give you a good answer.
Thank you, sir.